Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So I'm in Mayfair, London, which is an exceedingly posh area. And behind me is the house where J. Arthur Rank lived for the latter part of his life. Though he didn't actually die, he died in Winchester. Now, I don't know if he owned the whole lot, because when he died in 1972, it wouldn't have been as devastatingly expensive as it is now. Perhaps he did, and he was a very wealthy man. He was a multi-millionaire even in 70s terms. So what would that be in modern terms? Tens of millions of pounds he had? Maybe hundreds of millions, I'm not sure. Anyway, so he's born in Hull in 1888 into a well-to-do middle-class family. His father owned several flour mills. He was brought up in the Methodist Church, and indeed he went to the Lees School in Cambridge, which had been founded not long before, because the Methodist Church decided it ought to have an independent school of its own for wealthy Methodists, and it would be established in either Oxford or Cambridge, because those were the sites of the two best universities in the realm. And eventually they plumped for Cambridge. So then, after there, he was set up his own business. Very few people went into university back then. He wasn't a scholarly sort. In fact, his father thought he was a bit thick, and that the boy's only hope was joining the family firm. So he tried to set up his own flour business with self-raising flour, but it was a flop. So eventually he had to join his dad's business, and he did reasonably well in that. So he was not just a nominal Methodist, he was zealous about the church, and he had the nonconformist conscience. I'm not sure if he was teetotal actually, although some Methodists were. It's not absolutely essential that they eschew alcohol. Anyway, he taught Sunday school, and then films came into it. Sometimes by the 1920s there were short educational films to help some of the children know about the precepts of Methodism. And Rank used to read the Methodist Times, the newspaper of that church. Incidentally, he was Joseph Arthur Rank, but his father was also Joseph, which is why our man always went by his middle name, Arthur, but then J. Arthur Rank, because strictly speaking, Arthur's a middle name, so it gives his first initial. So then J. Arthur Rank saw all these letters in the Methodist Times complaining about the morally disimproving effect of pictures, films as we now call them. Could cinema not show morally improving films instead? So he said, well, that's a really good idea. We can't just moan about the problem, we've got to solve it. So he set up a film production company called the Rank Organization. The only other person I can think of who gives his name to an organization is the Trump with the Trump Organization. Anyhow, so he set up a film production company in the 1930s, and it's meant to produce films to raise the moral tone, as in no bad language, not glamorizing violence, no hints at fornication or adultery. Obviously, you couldn't actually show that on nudity. So to make people better people, to encourage ethical behavior, good guys win. I suppose that's why it's fiction, and not to be glorifying gangsters and so on. So at that time, 80% of films shown on British screens were American productions. So he had some success with that. It wasn't a great commercial success. And the Second World War, the UK just had less money to buy Hollywood productions, and the government commissioned films, information films, propaganda films. Even that 1944 edition of Henry V, starring Sir Laurence Olivier, meant to bolster patriotic spirit. That was produced by him, but it was shot in Powerscourt, Ireland. Obviously, my part of Ireland, we were neutral at the time, so that's why you can find lots of able-bodied men to act as extras. Now, slight problem with that so-called patriotic film is the French were on this country's side. They were not the enemy in the Second World War, but never mind. It was quite true to life, that film, though. Well, they had a replica of the Globe Theatre for the 1944 iteration of Henry V, and they had a prepubescent boy playing that French princess in it, because of course women weren't allowed on stage till the 1660s by Charles II. So back to him, and he made many more films after the Second World War, including filming the royal family as well, the Queen's coronation in 1953, filming the Royal Ballet and things like that. These he felt were morally uplifting. He was married, he had 2 daughters, and he was quite a snappy dresser. But by the 1960s, more people had got televisions, and cinema was in long-term decline. So he had to sell off a lot of his former cinemas. Quite often they became bingo halls. Now, as a Methodist, he had a principled objection to gambling. So he never laid a wager himself, despite living where there are a few casinos around here in Mayfair, the Claremont Club and all that. but he was a bit of an ethical contortionist because he didn't see anything wrong with him selling this to a bingo hall, knowing that money would be made from gambling. He wasn't directly profiting from the gambling. Anyway, he died in 1972. So people talk about going for a J. Arthur Rank, which is Cockney rhyming slang for an onanistic episode, or indeed in what's called Austin Powers, he says going for a Johnny Rank. To mean just that. Actually, his name was Joseph Rank, not John Rank. Well, that is enough about J. Arthur Rank. Toodaloo.